Well, we just did the perfect open for this show. The problem was we had it set on 1080p. We can't broadcast on 1080p. So let's work our way back to it. First, let's welcome for our Fife, Alabama with his, how many state championship is this? One of the voices of the Red Devils, Jeremy Johnson. How you doing, buddy?
Man, I'm good. Man, what a season. Second year helping with the Red Devil radio broadcast, and fell a little short the year last year. What a season for the Fife Red Devils, and it was really a lot of fun to get to be in that broadcast booth at Jordan Hare Stadium. And yet again, another Blue Mount comes home to Fife.
Yeah, Jeremy, I was telling you earlier that I would get you about the first 45 minutes or an hour of your broadcast. And oftentimes I would cut off, but you were talking about your play-by-play guy. I know we're here to do wrestling show tonight and talk about somebody special.
Yeah.
But he is really good. What is his name? Your play-by-play.
Yeah, Adam Ward is he's a pro, and I don't tell him this. We make a habit of trying to emasculate each other as much as possible. But no, Adam's a pro. Anybody that listens to him, and working with him in preparation and stuff, he's always really prepared, and I think he does a fantastic job. It kind of offsets me and my cohort there, Greg Mears and Drew Sims. But Adam's the pro. We're just the rednecks trying to hang in there with him.
It was a great season, and I got to do a game from I actually sat in a visitor's booth at what's the old field they played at Birmingham? Shield Watkins. What was that called?
Legion
Gosh,
Field.
Legion Field.
Field.
That's God. It seems like another decade ago. Got to do a game from there, and I got to sit in a visitor's booth where John Ward had sat like a few weeks later. So for us high school guys to get to go to those college stadiums, it's special.
Oh man, it was. I got chill bumps, man. Just getting to walk in there and getting set up before the broadcast, and interesting view at Jordan Hare. We were actually in the corner of one of the end zones, and that's where the radio teams broadcast from. Interesting view, but it was a great view from where I was sitting.
Well, Howie Chaney, before we get on to the wrestling show, we had a great year with the Tyler Van Show. It was absolutely fabulous. We had great support. We all left about 4 months ago to do football and said we'd be back. In between there and then, I kind of had a little accident. If you can't tell by my Kurt Angle look, I am going to use I won a world title with a broken neck at some point in this podcast. But Howie, we had great support, and it's great to be back. And you ended up doing several Sylvania games last year.
We did. Me and John Sills did quite a few of them for 98.3 Wild Country. Enjoyed it. Appreciate them letting us do that. And it was great because I would send you the scores. Jeremy would send me the scores of the Fife game. We was just passing scores around, and it made the broadcast a lot more interesting. On our side, I don't know about y'all's, but
yeah,
it does.
Certainly did.
It's nice. Even though I'm across the Tennessee state line, you'd be shocked how many people follow Fife or how many people follow Sylvania. And we talked about Fife winning another state title. Sylvania run to the semifinals. I don't think anybody would have predicted that in week one with Coach Devan in his second year.
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't expecting it. You lose the playmakers that you lose or that they lost on offense, you'd think they'd kind of dip down a little bit, but it seemed like they just got stronger.
Yeah,
and had a great season.
Yeah, and I think football. Listen, there were a lot of years where football on Sand Mountain, you might have good seasons, but you're not going to compete for state championships or make deep runs. And I think we're seeing that, with Geraldine, with Sylvania, of course Fife, Pisgah. Pisgah's right there, man. And I think it's, of course, Fife's been so dominant, and Fife, you see the score of ball games. But I think that Geraldine game, that Sylvania game, and that Pisgah game, both Pisgah games. Really underestimate how really good those teams were this past year. All three of those teams, excellent football teams. Wouldn't have been a bit surprised to see any of those three be playing for a state championship.
Jeremy, we used to joke with Coach Van because we played them all. And well, I used to joke with him and ask him, I said, was Auburn and Alabama busy the week you tried to schedule them, or could you not get them? Because we played 5. We played Pisgah. We played the gauntlet. Teams that won made it to the finals. One state champion, one runner-up, so it was a good football season. And again, we're sorry we're gone. In January, I was in a car wreck. I broke T2, so I've been kind of hesitant to come back on the air until I got the clearance to go back to work. But, boys, special announcement for the people that knows what happened. Monday, I'm going back to work. They are going to let me work from home for 8 weeks until I get this thing off. But I'm just thankful to God that here 5 weeks later, I'm able to get back to work and get something done. So thank you, all the people that prayed for me, and I appreciate our family at RiverCity-Media very much. And we're here to talk about another tragedy, a tragedy that really touched me. We lost, I think, the most influential man in wrestling other than Vince McMahon over the last 30 years. President of CWA, president of USWA, president of TNA, former pro wrestler. So when we get into his wrestling, I'm going to talk about him. He invented the scaffold match in 1973.
Yes.
I mean, this guy was an innovator, tried to buy WCW, was in a hairbreadth of buying WCW. And I think he wanted to take WCW back to that regional territory field. And I think first thing he'd have done, if he'd have done that, is hired Jerry Lawler to WCW, who was his catch cow for a year. But Jeremy, tell me a little bit about Jerry Jarrett. Of course, Jeff's father, Jerry Jarrett, former wrestler, promoter, worked for WCW, worked for WWF, did it all.
Yeah, well, for me, limited TV access when I was a kid, and you're thinking about late 70s, early 80s. And so I learned a lot of these things, after the fact. But, the things that he did, especially the last 3 years, I've learned a lot about Jerry Jarrett and his contribution, about Jeff's grandmother, Teeny, and her contribution. She was a wrestling promoter before him, but innovative, really, in my opinion, ahead of his time.
Absolutely.
And when maybe we'll get into that, but I think about, these hardcore matches, I think they originated in Memphis, with some of the things that they did, and I'll hold off on getting in detail about that. You mentioned the scaffold match. Here's the other thing: some of the characters he created. So I'll stop right there. But just really, if you think about wrestling, and you mentioned it earlier, I think in our False Open that we did. But other than Vince McMahon, he may be he possibly could be the second most influential person in wrestling history. Maybe that's the reach, but he very easily, that's arguable, but he very easily could be.
Howie, the thing about it when it was a territory too, 52 weeks a year, he would sell out Memphis Mid-South Coliseum, 11,000 and something people. We talk about wrestling being popular now, but think about it. One city would put 500,000 people in an auditorium for his product a year. And someone special to mine in your heart, he got our brother JC's start many, many years ago and launched Jim Cornette, the Rock and Roll Express, Midnight Express, so many more. But this guy really put his finger on wrestling.
He did. What he done was allow the Southern people be Southern people instead of trying to make them be something that they weren't.
Yeah.
He let Jim Cornette be Jim Cornette. He let Jerry Lawler be the king. And it paid off for him. I mean, he made no telling how much money off of just letting people be who they were. And that was a game changer in wrestling.
Yes. And his famous saying, personal issues sell tickets. And I made it personal, you sold tickets. But let's run back over to Jeremy. You seem to want to start with his wrestling career. Let's go back a little bit. I told you in a text earlier today, I was lucky enough to go to Memorial Auditorium about twice a year. One of the nights I was there, it was Tojo Yamamoto and Jerry Jarrett versus the interns. And that was my intro into wrestling. And I remember not knowing what the really was happening. They beat Jerry Jarrett up for about 45 minutes and then tagged Tojo in and let him beat up everybody in the building, including a few people in the first row. But I guess that was my first lesson in learning how to sell, was through Jerry Jarrett. But go ahead with your.
Well, I think that was the formula, and I think that formula has carried over with Jeff. In his early days, you beat the holy hell out of them, and then let Tojo come in, with a hot tag and clean house, and it worked. They were Jerry was a baby face,
And
a popular baby face,
a precursor
likable.
Is what I call him. He was the long-haired blonde kid that everybody rooted for. Baby-faced, everybody loved.
Yep. And my remembrance, of course, I never watched Jerry wrestle, but with Jeff is, he was when he first started, he was a lean 180, 190 pound kid, lanky.
190.
Right. Well, so and to see him get beat on, it was just like it. I mean, it felt kind of playing off our title. It felt real to me to watch it. It's like, man, they're beating this kid to death. But it worked. It worked. And his philosophy, that personal issues, I think it still applies today. The things that I enjoy about wrestling right now, this thing with the bloodline not getting into today. There's personal things going on there, and it makes me interested.
That is a future show between now and WrestleMania. A great point, and you often saw that in Memphis, just like with the bloodline. You've got a multi-level feud where it's just not Sami Zayn versus the bloodline anymore. It's Cody Rhodes versus Sami Zayn versus Roman Reigns. If that match doesn't turn into a three-way at WrestleMania, I'll be shocked. I mean, I think
I don't think you can mess it up.
Yeah. Howie, one thing I was going to ask you about is early on, our boy JC talked about how Jerry Jarrett basically told Nick Goulas, no, your son's not going to be in Memphis. I'm going to break away from you. He went against the establishment and basically took over Memphis, and he did that on the back of Jerry Lawler. Him and Jerry Lawler became business partners one night when Lawler went to his house and saw Jerry Jarrett living in a 6,000 square foot house. All of a sudden, Jerry part owner of CWA. But really, you can't think of one without the other because Lawler was his guy for years.
Yeah, he did the smart thing. He let Lawler, that had been wrestling in the Memphis area for all those years, come in and take over and be the man that he needed to be. Not stealing the line from Ric Flair, but to be the man, you got to beat the man. And
that was my intro into wrestling. And I remember not knowing what I don't know who that is, but he's a smart sounding guy.
But anyway, they let Lawler come in and just be the man, and him being a local product of Memphis, everybody fell in love with him, a hometown guy.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like with us being around here. We may not care much about the Cincinnati Bengals, but with Evan McPherson up there, go Bengals. Who dat? So you're going to fall in love with that person. And Jarrett just said, come on in, Lawler, take over and do what you got to do. And then, of course, Mama Jarrett took care of the books by what JC said, and she did the payouts.
Yeah, well, she was doing that for Nick Goulas and Roy Welch. We would be remiss not to mention Roy Welch, who with Nick Goulas originally founded Memphis before Jerry took it over. And Roy Welch, grandfather of the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller, who is a great podcast if you never listened to it. But His wrestling career, he did his tag team thing, but it was really when he gave up wrestling and become a promoter, he really put his stamp on it. And I don't know if you ever saw Memphis wrestling much, Jeremy, but one of the things he did was he had two bookers. And basically 6 months out of the year, he let Lawler book. And 6 months out of the year, he let Dundee book. And that's the way he kept two super egos happy. Lawler would bring in all these crazy characters like the Mummy and Batman. And Dundee was more about the feuds and stuff. But it really gave the territory a different feel. We talked about Lawler, but Dundee was there with him too. And Dundee was Lawler's nemesis for many, many years.
To say the least, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the superstar. Again, I can remember watching. I think WDEF in Chattanooga there used to have the studio wrestling show, and I can remember the superstar in there, Tojo, and yeah, that I thought it was very smart for him to do that because it gave them, like you said, they ran a weekly show, right?
Right.
And to keep it fresh,
Lance
and,
Russell,
and
Dave Brown.
keep it fresh, you have a different booking philosophy, maybe a different ideas, and so you guarantee to not get kind of stale and redundant. And I think it was a great philosophy. Probably could have thrown in another booker or two in there, and maybe every quarter. But I thought that probably was the key for them to stay as popular and successful, for that time period.
I got a couple of things. I'm going to run it by y'all, and then I'll let you wrap up. We'll stay on Memphis, and then we'll leave Memphis. But just three things I think is critical. Howie, in 1979, he had a young Michael Hayes and a young Terry Gordy. And he was the first guy that let them put the lights on twirling, play Freebird on the way into the even though some people had used music, not on an every week basis like the Freebirds become the Free. That redefined wrestling. And 6 months later, if you went to a house show, everybody had music. Dusty Rhodes was playing the Allman Brothers. Junkyard Dog was playing Another One Bites the Dust. But that really changed the presentation of wrestling.
Yeah, it absolutely did. And it got to the point where I think y'all have heard the story where Jim Cornette said that they were at a house show and they forgot their music. Everybody forgot their music. So JC had to run out to his car and just grab whatever tapes he had, bring them in, and they just played different music. And nobody knew who was coming in at the time because it wasn't their normal music that's being played. So that was one of those things where, you can say what you want to, but Jerry Jarrett changed the way professional wrestling was at that time.
And I still believe if you turn on WWE now, they have their own music department for that very reason. And you can't even get a run in, Jeremy, without the music playing first. You'll think, I mean, it's almost, to me, it kills it, but they'll play everybody's music first.
Yeah, it's part of wrestling now. I mean, if you think about some of the things I enjoy the most are the entrances. Some of the entrances are just phenomenal now. I mean, Undertaker's entrance to me is best of all time. Cody's right now, when he appeared at WrestleMania, and when he came up out of that, I thought and the other night the crowd singing along his own music. So it's a big part of wrestling, and to think that they were doing that in 1979, that probably didn't get license rights to play the music, but
he talked about that.
Yeah, so it's amazing. Somebody I want to bring up right here, and this is something that one of the few things that actually I always remember, it stuck out in my mind. Billy Squire, Everybody Wants You, the Fabulous Ones.
Yes.
And if I found it because I remember watching it, the videos with the Fabulous Ones. That's Steve Kern and Stan Lane. that it was way ahead of its time, using that music and putting together vignettes and things like that.
So let me ask y'all something real quick about this music thing. Throw this out there. Now people would get upset, or artists would get upset if you use their music. But back then, do you not feel like that the artist was loving it because that was sending people out to buy their records, or
Absolutely.
I guess
Mhm.
8-tracks back then?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's flipped now,
Yes.
but it was almost like a service to that musician, because they didn't have the availability to. I mean, it was like you said, it was 8 tracks and maybe cassettes, maybe and some records, and that was the only means they had to get their music out there.
It was basically like a free advertisement, free commercial for everybody.
Hmm.
All right, before we be moving on, it would be remiss to talk about maybe the worst business dealing that he ever did. And I want to bring this up because it plays such a role in history. I say it was a bad business deal, but you look back, he had a preponderance of tag teams at one point. He had the Fabs, he had the Freebirds. So basically, he decides he's going to go with the Fabs, which at the time was Jackie Fargo's Fabulous Ones, and the Freebirds as his face and heel team. So he works a deal with Watts and out of Mid South, and he trades some young wrestlers, some young tag teams for a young Rick Rude, a young, I believe it was Hacksaw Jim Duggan, a couple of young Japanese wrestlers, and he took this young team and packaged it together and sent it down there. He sent down first Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson as the Rock and Roll Express. Then 6 months later, he sent down, or 3 months later, he sends down Dennis Condrey, Bobby Eaton, and Jim Cornette as the Midnight Express. Not only did he do that, he sent Bill Dundee to book it. He set the wrestling world on fire, and the greatest tag team of feud that would ever exist out of talent that he was overrun with. Man, that was a guy that could really spot talent if he had that sitting on his back.
Well, you think about it. We talked about the extreme aspect that they had. That one of the first concession stand brawls was Rick Gibson and Robert Gibson wrestling together, and then you had Rick Morton and Eddie Gilbert wrestling together in two separate matches. But then 79, 80, 81.
They also did Dundee, Lawler, Larry Latham, and Wayne.
Mhm.
Larry Latham went on to be the Moondog, and of course Wayne Ferris later became the Honky Tonk Man. That
So
brawl is as not well known in this country as anything.
So get this one. In addition, you mentioned the Honky Tonk Man. 81, Ricky Morton, Eddie Gilbert, before he was Hot Stuff, versus Masha Fuchi and Atsushi Onita, who started the FMW in Japan,
Yeah.
the Extreme Wrestling, where Terry Funk wrestled, and that's where the exploding barbed wire matches started. So that was Onita, who came over here to learn American style wrestling. So that's insane when you start thinking about all of that.
Look at Jeremy doing his research there, naming names and dates and
Yeah.
everywhere else.
Onita is Cactus Jack in Japan.
Yeah. Yes. Cactus Jack actually wrestled over there too. So
I went through and I'm sure we'll get a better list later on, but people that worked in Memphis at one point or another: Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Undertaker, Kane, The Rock. Vince McMahon used Memphis before he had an NXT. He sent his young people there to get some seasoning because it was such a well-run territory. But
didn't John Cena drive the rain truck?
Yeah, it's something crazy like that. I know the Undertaker was the punishment or pain or something. But Howie, nothing was bigger than when a 145-pound comedian from LA ended up on the Letterman show with Jerry Lawler smacking the shit out of him. Sorry, folks, but that's what he did.
yeah.
on national TV, Andy Kaufman made more money than most pro wrestlers will make in a lifetime.
Yeah, Kaufman helped put Memphis wrestling on the map by doing that, going to a Letterman and doing all that stuff. And it, Memphis, like you said, was a territory. People down southeast knew about it. When you go to national syndicated shows, CBS, David Letterman, and Kaufman and Lawler's on there, it goes nationwide. And when a wrestler slaps a well-known actor like that, all the news stations is going to replay it on their nightly as well. So that was like a bombshell for Memphis wrestling.
And it looked real. It looked real.
I mean, really denied it at the point that even till today, no one's really denied that it wasn't.
So listen, I heard this story and I didn't have time to look it up, and it may have been Lawler telling this. Is that Kaufman sold that match so well that he even wondered if he'd hurt him.
Okay.
The match itself. Go ahead.
Jerry Lawler has a YouTube. I'll link it on RiverCity-Media. He has a breakdown of the whole feud in his words. And Kaufman never got paid. Jerry would write him checks. And when he died, a few months, unfortunately, he died soon after this. The checks were at his house still uncashed. He just wanted to be a pro wrestling heel. But the greatest part of it was finally all the build up. They've done everything. They've had all kinds of crazy matches with Lawler and against Kaufman and Jimmy Hart, Lawler. And so finally it's Lawler versus Andy Kaufman. It goes like 30 seconds and he gives him a headlock and he puts him in a headlock and then he just backdrops him in pile drivers.
Yeah.
Here's the great part of it. Lawler said that there was another match coming because it was so short. So there was the main event coming on. Paul Morton, Ricky Morton's dad, was the referee. He sends him over there and tells Kaufman to roll out of the ring that, it's over. And he's selling it. So he tells the referee to tell Jerry Lawler he wants an ambulance. So Lawler sends and says, we can't afford an ambulance. That's $300. Just tell him to get out of the ring. Andy Kaufman sends back to Jerry Lawler. He'll pay for it. And refuses to get up. The man stayed in, let me tell you, he stayed in traction 3 days.
That's what.
It is the greatest thing ever. So
that's where I was going with that. You told it much better, and I think at one point he looked at Jerry in the hospital and said, "You think they bought it?" How great was that?
If nobody's seen Jim Carrey as Andy Kaufman, Man on the Moon, they do a very good job covering that. And there's nothing more we can say about it. But I do want to move on a little bit farther down the road. Of course, he had got this territory from Goulas by refusing to use George Nick, Goulas' son. But he took on a task that I would not have envied. He took Dallas from Fritz Von Erich, bought him out after the suicide of Kerry Von Erich, after the suicide of Mike Von Erich, the death of David Von Erich. He was sued by multiple of the Von Erich children. I think Kevin sued him. Kerry may have still been alive when he first done it. I think Kerry was still alive when he first took it. But what a mess it would to go in there. And he brought it back alive with Eric Emery and Tennessee versus Texas. Jeremy, how hard would it be to go to Dallas, Texas, and promote after the demise of the Von Erich family?
Well, I mean, you if you know anything about the Von Erichs, I mean, they were Texas. They were Texas wrestling, especially in that Dallas area. And they were so beloved. I mean, heck, they could pack out a stadium back then. And, for him to go in as an outsider and be able. You have to overcome a lot. You have to earn people's trust, win goodwill among your supporters. That's a monumental task, and I don't. To me, that would take years to do.
I would think it'd be very similar if somebody went in and tried to take over Memphis and Jerry Lawler had passed away.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for
Nearly
him to do that, it's incredible.
Yeah, nearly impossible to do. But what he done was amazing.
And he had the USWA rolling in the early 90s when nothing else was going. He tried to merge with the AWA, which Vern Gagne was going to merge with him, and you would have had one territory. Basically, he would have owned all the Midwest, from Memphis up to Minneapolis, down to Dallas. Outside of Jim Crockett's run, who I think made the best run at Vince McMahon, Jerry Jarrett, even though had a huge portion of territory that he had taken away, that he was having more success than Vince McMahon. Side note, Harley Race saw one of Jerry Lawler's famous videos where he beat up Harley Race, Hulk Hogan, Nick Bockwinkel, and about 4 or 5 other people. He went into Memphis one night and threatened to beat Lawler up for real because he said he'd done beat up everybody in the nation.
And he would. He would.
If Vern Gagne gives him control of the AWA, that's a big chunk, Howie. He's got control of a third of the country.
He'll be competing with WWE at the moment if that would have took place. They probably wouldn't have been a WCW. It would have been whatever he would have called it versus WWE.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Jermey, just to kind of wind up and move on a little bit, just because we're running late on time. There's so much I could talk about for Memphis. But he ended up, and Jim Cornette used this exact line. He said he was talking to Jerry one night, and Jerry looked at him and said, I have $250,000 in the bank for doing wrestling, for running wrestling shows. And I don't plan on putting any more in there. And Cornette basically said Jerry Jarrett committed that amount of money to wrestling, and if it didn't work, he was out of it. He sells, Memphis goes dry. He gets out. He's out of the business. And then out of nowhere, his son and him starts a legitimate second business in TNA. This guy, Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, Mick Foley, Kurt Angle, Samoa Joe, Kevin Nash. He was a number 2. Probably, to me, he was even farther along than AEW was. More big names, more names that we all knew. But again, a bad business deal with DC Carter. But TNA was, in the very beginning, was great.
TNA.
Huntsville.
Do what?
Yeah.
The very first TNA show was in Huntsville, Alabama.
Yep. So, as far as TNA goes, I mean, I didn't watch it from its inception, but I caught it early when it was at its best. But they were innovative. You had the 6-sided ring. You had the X division,
junior heavyweights, basically.
Right, which they were out there. You had, and you mentioned established talents, but you had AJ Styles.
Yes.
You had a Consequences Creed, who is also known now as Xavier Woods. You think about one of the greatest. Well, I always loved the Monster Abyss.
Yes, me too.
I mean, you think about some of the talent that they actually developed, and you had veterans. You had Dusty Rhodes coming in there for a little while. You had Christian Cage in there a couple of times. Gosh.
They had Jim Cornette come in and fire Bruce Pritchard.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, and something that I don't know if you guys noticed it early, and I know a lot of this was more so probably Jeff than Jerry, but their emphasis on the women's division years ago when the WWE was just kind of passing it off. I mean, you had the beautiful people. You had Gail Kim in there. You had Awesome Kong. ODB, which was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
You know, was it you was Victoria, I think, in the WWE. So I mean, wow, they just I love, and they're, wait, by the way, commentary team to me was one of the best. Don West, who passed away just recently. Don West and Mike Tenay together. Don West is a raving man. He would be me being commentary on wrestling, and Mike Tenay keeping it together.
Yeah.
Uh,
Network Don West. Who would thought
the
that?
Home Shopping Network, Don West. And, that was a Jerry and Jeff thing. That, yeah, he was unorthodox. If you listened, I listened to Jeff's show talking about Don West just a few weeks ago. The polished people didn't want him, but that's why they wanted him. He was out there. He was a fan, and it made it interesting. So I could go on about that, but man, TNA was at one time strong number 2.
The two things that helped Jerry Jarrett with the TNA, to me, in my opinion, was one, when it first started, $9.99 every Friday or every Wednesday. Excuse me. Money coming in every week. 2, old school entrances, good guys, bad guys, different part of the building.
Yeah.
And we cannot forget, in the 2000s, maybe the best tag team division in wrestling, ran at the top by Beer Money and Chris Harris and James Storm and Robert Roode. Then you had the Dudleys come through. You had Rick Steiner, Scott Steiner come through. You had all kind of, Motor City Machine Guns. Young Bucks as Generation Me.
That's right. I was about to say that.
So, and we're running low on time, but he sold 72% of that company in 2002 to Panda Injuries, Dixie Carter. She brought in the Vince Russos and the Hulk Hogans, and it kind of killed it. But one of the tragedies is him and Jeff in 2004 kind of split, and I'm happy to read. I was reading some stuff today. They went 10 years without speaking, and finally in 2015 they kind of came back together and settled their differences. And there's nothing like a father and son running a business together, but if you ever worked with your dad, you can understand it's one of the most frustrating things.
Yes.
Wrestling a money deal company. Jeremy, just sum up. I want to cover one more thing. I'll be remiss if I didn't cover this. This comes from our boy JC too. Once he set down Memphis, he was hired by Vince McMahon at the same time the steroid trials was going on. Our boy JC said on his podcast, I guess most people assumed one of his inside people would have gotten Vince McMahon's chair, maybe Brother Love. What's his real name? I can always forget. I call him Brother Love. Bruce Pritchard, or one of the Briscoes or something. But JC said Vince McMahon had in his head that if he ever went to prison over the steroid deal, and he thought he was going to prison over it, that Jerry Jarrett would have been placed in front of the WWE. Jeremy, does that make sense to you, that Vince McMahon would take it out of control of anybody in his family, anybody in his current, and put a independent thinker like Jerry Jarrett in charge of the WWE?
Well, I think Jerry, I think he understood that Jerry Jarrett was a businessman.
Absolutely.
I mean, and we didn't really we talked about him in the wrestling business, but he had tons of other interests outside of wrestling. Right. And so I think that he recognized the mind that Jerry had for wrestling and that business mind that he had. So I could totally see that.
If I'm not mistaken, I think I remember hearing on one of Bruce Pritchard's podcasts where he said the same thing, that Vince brought Jerry in to take control.
Yeah, I think that was the ultimate goal. But let's just wrap it up. I want to give both of you some time. Anything we didn't cover, Jeremy, we'll start with you. Just take whatever you want here and just kind of shotgun research you had done or anything we didn't cover.
Well, one thing I would not want us to close this out without mentioning, and we know who the biggest star in the WWF was in the 80s, and that was Hulk Hogan.
Yes.
Okay, so talking about Jerry Jarrett and that innovation that they had using music, the first pro vignette ever was a young Terry Bollea filmed in Jerry Jarrett's basement and voiced over by my my play-by-play guy, Adam Ward's boss, Michael St. John.
Nice.
The Hulk video.
Yep.
If you don't know, if you've never watched it, go look it up. It talks about the size of his biceps, the size of his thighs, and then at the end he goes, "He is the Hulk."
Yeah.
Before he was ever referred to as Hulk Hogan.
I think what he was wrestling as is Sterling Golden, and they started calling him Sterling Golden.
Yes. So that was a Jerry Jarrett thing.
Yeah, and we'd be remiss when Hulk Hogan's biggest opponents during that time was Sugar Bear Harris, who was a jobber for Jerry Jarrett that he took home. Him and Jerry Lawler painted some stars on his belly and got an African mask off of Jerry Jarrett's wall and went out on the back of Jerry Jarrett's farm. And you got that video just the same. Go look it up. He is Kamala. Do you mind?
Like when I was a kid, when he challenged Hulk Hogan, I was scared to death.
Yeah.
I thought he's going to kill him. So think about this. Austin Idol was a jobber. They rebranded him the Universal Heartthrob Austin Idol. Lord Humongous, who was numerous people played that character. Sid Vicious, Sid being one of them.
Yes.
You just think about all the things that they did. It's just nuts to think about that they came up with those things. Jimmy Hart was a big part of Memphis wrestling.
Absolutely.
Mouth of the South. So anyway, we could go on and on about that.
And if anybody has watched The Young Rock, you get a good taste of Memphis wrestling because Rocky Johnson was there for a long period of time after he left the WWF.
Downtown Bruno.
Downtown Bruno is
Hey, Coco Beware. Coco Beware.
Hey, Hillbilly Jim was her. You know, my personal favorite. He got mad at Kamala for leaving him, and he took what was his name? Stan Frazier. He become Uncle Elmer in the WWE. 7-foot fat white guy, and he put him in the Kamala makeup and called him Kamala too. And that way. Alec, what you got for us, buddy?
The one thing, I don't know if Jeremy knows this or not, but the last time that Jerry Jarrett ever appeared on TV or any type of wrestling, we was there. That was the last match. Flair.
Yep.
That's the last time he was saw on any type of TV of wrestling.
Yep.
I didn't think about
it. And you know that I heard this today that he was so excited to have that opportunity to be a part of not only that event but the angle itself that they tried to put together with Jeff and Jay and stuff, and so I thought that was pretty neat.
Well, the I don't know, the promo, I guess you call it. It was Jerry, Jeff, and Jerry Lawler backstage.
Yeah.
They were talking, basically the kings of Memphis at that moment.
Yep.
And not only that, did we lose Jerry Lawler, we lost Jay Briscoe just recently. We could do 2 hours on him. It was so nice to see Jeff Jarrett and Mark Briscoe both on AEW the other night. And you feel like, and they gave Mark Briscoe a contract, so he will be part of AEW moving forward. But It was just kind of nice to see Jeff wrestling there. I know it
Yeah.
had to be hard. You know, his dad's funeral was the next day or two, and
Yeah.
but you would probably think that that Jerry Jarrett would want him to be there, Jeremy.
Well, I think that's what I'd heard, that his wife said, no, you go and wrestle, you know, and it's kind of cool though. You figure Jeff Jarrett is 55 years old and he looks like $1 million right now. He still can wrestle at a high level, and my God, he can bring some heat as a heel for sure.
Ric Flair brought him out of retirement by that last match.
Yep, yep. And boy, did he ever get some heat on that for sure.
Well, it's good to do a show again, boys, but it's under a bad circumstance. We'll try to get back on for everybody that's been asking. I've got so many, when y'all bringing the wrestling show back, comments, and
They like us. They really like us.
I didn't even know from over in Jasper while I was in ICU, and told her that as soon as I got out of ICU, we would do the wrestling show on a weekly basis. So I guess I owe it to her. Dorothy Hunt, we're here. We're here.
Hey, I'm game.
We'll get back on it, and of course our boys coming up just right after us. They've took our old show that I was on, that with Robbie Davis and Raj and Brandon Chain, and we've added a good friend from Michigan, our friend Tom, and they've gone and rebranding it as Reckless Speculation. If you stay on just a few more minutes, they'll be on. They do a great job, and they've cut it down to an hour, new format. So they've done a lot with it since I left. And you know, I want to focus on the wrestling show, and I want to focus on Sylvania football, and I want to focus on more local stuff where I really think I really love this history of wrestling. And once I got down the path of doing this, I realized how much I love high school football, and there's not enough coverage of it. We need to get more coverage. We need to get more people. We need to get more shows on. I need to get more hours out there. After the Sylvania show, we know, we need to get Coach Benefield on here and talk again. We need to get Coach Pruitt on here and talk again. We need to get some local people. So, but thank you for waiting on us. But we're back. I may not look as good, but I'm still hanging on. Jeremy, closing words on Jerry Jarrett.
Hey, look, just a legend of wrestling. Who knows what wrestling would be without all that innovation and all the things that they did back in the late 70s, early 80s, especially.
Howie, Jerry Jarrett, and I'm going to throw something else at you just because we love it. We love him so much. I think you and I are JC's biggest fans on earth, even though I have to. I have a love-hate relationship with him. When he starts talking off, he gets on a rant, I have to cut it off every now and then. But we truly, truly love JC. And we got to tell the Jerry Jarrett story with the JC story. When they was putting Cornette in the business, he went up to Cornette and told him if he could make people out in the audience hate him as bad as the boys did in the backstage, he's going to be irritating bastard back in the stage too, as he is. So he got our boy JC off to a good start, though.
Well, think about it. JC started out being a cameraman.
Yeah.
A camera boy. His mama would have to take him to the matches.
Yep.
So, that's amazing. But, like Jeremy said, the innovation and innovator of Jerry Jarrett kept wrestling alive till today. I mean, even though TNA is not a big name thing, they're on TV right now.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
right.
Running. That's things that people don't realize. Memphis is still running to this day. Don't look. But Jerry Lawler still wrestles in Memphis about once a month.
Yep.
So
he probably won't be for a while now, but yeah.
I think we need to put a tight bow on that tag team talk and just come up with our final top 10 teams of all times, no matter the era, no matter the promotion. And Howie, we'll let you sit in the hosting seat. And I think Jermey and I need to finish what we started last year. The top 10 teams, regardless of promotion, in the history of. Do we need to go through any? Do we need to go here to 10 do it?
Well, as long as I can have 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, I might be able to.
Top 20 teams of all times, regardless of federation, regardless. And I think we'll agree at number one. I really do think we'll both agree at number one. It's hard not to have number one, but that's what we'll do next week. And also, when we're doing that, we'll get to talk about the Briscoes and how we lost Jay recently. And God bless Jay. I really think Mark being on AEW now is a class move by Tony Khan. Sometimes I question AEW, but that was the right thing to do is to get Mark exposed.
Well, he's a legit character. I mean, he's. I don't know if you've seen a couple of his promos here the last couple of weeks and stuff, but they're good.
Absolutely.
He's going to be able to stand alone. I think, even though everybody's talking about Jay was probably the better talent of the two. Mark, I like the promos. Looking forward to it.
The redneck kung fu. There is nothing about it. For Jeremy Johnson, for Howie Chaney, I'm Randall Cunningham. I won the world championship with a broken freaking neck. Good.
And the gold medal.